Looking back, I mean, did you see anything suspicious in the days leading up to her abduction? Did you notice anything? Have you been racking your brains to try to think whether people might have been watching?
We didn't.
If we did, we wouldn't tell you because it may be important information, but we didn't, you know. It was such a relaxing holiday, and in fact, as a family unit, up until that night, and with the friends we were here, certainly for us, it was as good a holiday as we have had with the children, up until that point.
You have to keep believing that Madeleine is still going to be found alive and well.
Absolutely, and we
Do you ever, though, allow yourself to drift towards negative thoughts?
I think in the early days we did, and I think that's inevitable. I think any parent who's been through this does that, certainly in the first few days. We don't now. We're actually a lot stronger, a lot more hopeful now. And we have to be hopeful. It's what keeps us going and keeps us focused.
And what about Sean and Emily? What have you said to them about their big sister?
They're really good. I mean, they're at an age really where they're still quite young, and I guess it hasn't had the same impact on them as if they were a little bit older. They do talk about Madeleine, they pick up things and say Madeleine's, you know, and that's fine, but they're really good.
I think that's, you know, something that many people have said to us, that this is a parent's worst nightmare, and it is. It truly is, and it's as bad as you can possibly imagine. But, you know, if all three of the children had been taken, it could have been even worse than your worst nightmare. And we've got to be strong for them. You know, they're here. They do bring you back to earth, and we cannot, you know, grieve. One, we did grieve, of course we grieve, but ultimately we need to be in control so that we can influence and help in any way possible. Not just Sean and Emily, but the investigation.
If your child suddenly vanished during a family vacation, what would your first instinct be? Would you immediately call for help, or would something darker take hold, leading you to hide the truth? On May 3, 2007, in the quiet seaside town of Praia da Luz, one mother's scream shattered the night. They've taken her. But who exactly were they? And what really happened to Madeleine McCann that night? This story is not as simple as it seems. From the outside, the McCann family appeared to embody the epitome of success and stability. Jerry and Kate McCann, both highly regarded in the medical field, were married professionals with solid, well-established careers. Jerry worked as a consultant cardiologist, a role that demanded extensive training, dedication, and a deep knowledge of medical science. Kate, a general practitioner, brought the same expertise and compassion to her work. Together, they had secured positions of respect and financial security, affording them a comfortable lifestyle that many would envy. They were raising 3 children. Madeleine, their eldest daughter, who was just 3 years old at the time, and their twins, Sean and Emily, who were 2. The McCanns were often seen as the perfect family, educated, affluent, and deeply involved in their careers, while also maintaining strong family bonds. They had built a life that many would consider a model for others to follow. Their marriage was stable, their careers thriving, and their children were well cared for, adding to their image as the ideal family. However, this seemingly perfect life would soon be challenged in ways that no one could have predicted. The McCanns' lifestyle and social position would make their loss. Madeleine's disappearance feel all the more tragic and incomprehensible to the public. Their family, once admired for its picture-perfect qualities, would soon become the subject of intense scrutiny and suspicion. As the investigation unfolded, the contrast between their impeccable reputation and the dark cloud of suspicion that hung over them became increasingly pronounced. When the McCanns planned their vacation to Praia da Luz, a small coastal town in Portugal, it was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. The town, often referred to as Little Britain, because of its large British expatriate population and the influx of British tourists, seemed like the perfect place for a family vacation. Many British families frequented the area, and the familiarity of the surroundings made it an ideal destination for the McCanns. English was spoken everywhere, and the area was known for its family-friendly atmosphere, which aligned with the McCanns' priorities as parents. Kate McCann later admitted that, initially, she had reservations about the trip. The cost of the holiday was higher than they had anticipated, and she felt uneasy about spending so much money on a vacation. Despite her concerns, they decided to go ahead with the booking. The decision was influenced by a variety of factors, one of the most important being that the resort had been highly recommended by friends and acquaintances who had stayed in the Algarve region before. These recommendations painted Praia da Luz as a family-friendly haven, ideal for parents traveling with young children. The resort's amenities, including swimming pools, childcare services, and various activities, further solidified its appeal as a suitable choice for a family vacation. Moreover, the McCanns were not alone on this trip. They were accompanied by a group of close friends, families they had known for years. These friends, who would come to be known as the Tapas 7, were also parents of young children, making the holiday even more appealing for the McCanns. The group had been on vacation together before, and they were accustomed to the dynamics of traveling as a large social circle. The presence of these familiar faces likely made the McCanns feel more comfortable about the vacation, as they knew that they could rely on each other for support and companionship. During the day, the adults in the group would engage in various recreational activities such as tennis, swimming, and sunbathing. Jerry, a keen tennis player, regularly spent time on the courts, while other members of the group enjoyed leisurely activities around the resort. Meanwhile, the children were entertained with activities designed specifically for young ones, and the parents took advantage of the resort's childcare services. These routines were standard for the McCanns and their friends, offering both relaxation for the adults and fun for the children. In the evening, the group would gather at the resort's tapas restaurant, a casual yet exclusive spot where they would share meals and socialize. The restaurant was just a few minutes walk from the apartments they were staying in, making it a convenient and comfortable location for their nightly gatherings. Each evening, the parents would leave their children in the apartment to sleep, while they enjoyed dinner together. To ensure the children were safe while they dined, the McCanns and their friends employed a system of regular checks. One or two members of the group would leave the restaurant periodically, check on the children, and then return to the meal. This system gave the parents peace of mind, knowing that the children were being looked after during their absence. However, the decision to leave the apartment doors unlocked while the children slept became one of the most controversial aspects of the case. According to reports, the McCanns left the doors unlocked so they could enter quietly when conducting their periodic checks without disturbing the children. This decision was met with criticism, especially given the fact that the family was in a foreign country and staying in a complex with unfamiliar surroundings. Leaving young children unsupervised in an unlocked apartment, particularly in an area that was not their home, raised serious concerns. Critics were quick to point out that the McCanns, who were highly educated and well off, had the means to afford childcare services and could have made alternative arrangements to ensure their children were safe while they were out. The decision to leave the children alone, especially in such a high-profile case, would come under intense scrutiny in the following weeks. On the evening of Madeleine's disappearance, the routine was the same as usual. Kate McCann had reportedly gone to check on the children during the evening. According to her account, she had checked on the twins first, and everything seemed fine. Madeleine was the last to be checked, and Kate reportedly found her missing. The realization that Madeleine had disappeared sent the McCanns and their friends into a frenzy. Kate's words, "They've taken her," would echo in the minds of everyone involved, not just because of the panic in her voice, but also because of the certainty embedded in them. Kate immediately assumed that someone had abducted Madeleine. But the question remained, who had taken her? Why was she so certain of this abduction when there was no evidence of forced entry? This moment marked the beginning of a series of reactions and decisions that would raise even more questions in the days and weeks to come. Adding to the complexity of the situation, Jerry McCann's remark during the airport bus ride came under scrutiny. He had said, "I'm not here to enjoy myself." This statement, while seemingly innocuous at first, raised eyebrows later. It was seen as odd for a father traveling with his family on holiday to make such a comment. What could Jerry have meant? Some speculated that his words were indicative of something deeper, perhaps a lack of attachment to the vacation, or even a sign that he knew something was amiss long before Madeleine's disappearance. In retrospect, the McCanns' seemingly idyllic family life, their decision to leave their children unsupervised, and their group dynamics with the Tapas 7 would all come under the microscope. The family's reputation as the perfect family began to crack under the weight of the investigation, and what once seemed like a simple family holiday now seemed fraught with unanswered questions. The assumptions people made about the McCanns, about their lives, their relationships, and their actions, would soon be shattered, and the case of Madeleine McCann's disappearance would become far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. This vacation, which had begun with such high hopes, would soon become a nightmare that would haunt the McCanns for years to come. What appeared to be a carefree family holiday would be overshadowed by tragedy, confusion, and an endless search for answers that may never come. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann remains one of the most perplexing and widely debated cases of the 21st century. While the facts surrounding her abduction or possible death have remained elusive, one element stands out above all else: the so-called golden window of time, the 90 minutes between when Madeleine was last seen and when she was discovered missing. This crucial period is the key to understanding whether it could have been possible for her death to be concealed, and whether any foul play occurred during that window. In this analysis, we will break down this critical period based on the timeline and explore both the logical and psychological aspects surrounding the events of that night. The timeline begins with a brief but significant sighting of Madeleine McCann at around 6:40 p.m. This is the last confirmed time anyone other than the McCanns and their immediate group saw Madeleine alive. David Payne, a member of the Tapas 7, one of the groups of friends with whom the McCanns were vacationing, reported seeing Madeleine that evening. David Payne, who was also a family friend, described seeing her in the apartment as he passed by it. At the time, Madeleine was reportedly playing in the living room, possibly waiting for the evening's activities. This sighting provides the last reliable evidence that Madeleine was alive at that time. The absence of further independent sightings adds weight to the timeline, as this marks the final interaction she had before her disappearance. However, the exact details of this brief encounter are sparse, and this gap in information has fueled various theories about what happened afterward. After Madeleine's last confirmed sighting, Jerry McCann, her father, went to play tennis at 7 p.m. Jerry, an avid tennis player, spent much of his time during the day engaging in sports while on vacation. At 7 p.m., he went to the tennis courts for a scheduled game, leaving Kate to manage the children in the apartment. The fact that Jerry was not in the apartment during this critical window raises questions, especially when considering the following sequence of events. Jerry was at the tennis courts for about an hour, leaving Kate alone with the children. This would later become an important piece in the puzzle, as it reflects the normalcy of the evening routine, yet also emphasizes how things could have shifted within that brief period. It is also important to note that Jerry's whereabouts were well accounted for during this time. He was seen by other members of the Tapas 7 both arriving and leaving the tennis courts, which corroborates his claim of being there at that specific time. This establishes a certain level of accountability regarding his actions that evening, though it also places him away from the apartment and potentially far from any possible incident that could have occurred during this time. Around 8:30 p.m., Jerry and Kate McCann arrived at the Tapas restaurant for their evening meal, joining their friends from the Tapas 7. The restaurant was located just a few minutes walk from the apartment where the family was staying. This marks the start of the window of time that has been crucial to both the timeline of Madeleine's disappearance and the various theories that have been proposed. Before heading to the restaurant, Kate had reportedly checked on the children. She had checked on them earlier in the evening as part of their routine to ensure that they were safe and asleep. Madeleine, Sean, and Amelie were all in their beds at that time, according to statements made by both Kate and Jerry. The couple's agreement to leave their children alone in the apartment during the dinner with their friends was not unusual for them. They had been on vacation together before and relied on these periodic checks. However, this time, Kate found something that would change everything. When she checked on the children later, she discovered that Madeleine was missing. At this point, the McCanns and their friends immediately began a frantic search of the apartment and surrounding area, but there was no sign of Madeleine. The golden window of time, the 90-minute period from when Madeleine was last seen by David Payne at 6:40 p.m. to when she was discovered missing by Kate at around 10 p.m., has been the focus of much speculation. Could it have been enough time to cover up a death, or perhaps for someone to abduct her? This 90-minute gap is key in understanding both the logical and psychological dynamics at play during that evening. On the one hand, this window of time is quite short. 90 minutes is a brief period in which to execute a complex cover-up or concealment, especially when considering the actions that would need to occur during this time. If Madeleine had died accidentally during that time frame, it would have taken significant effort to hide the body, move it discreetly, and establish a believable cover story, all within a matter of an hour and a half. For the parents, panic and emotional turmoil would have been high, making it even harder to act calmly or rationally. Yet, for the McCanns, the choices they made during this window would play a significant role in shaping how the case would unfold in the years to come. From a logical standpoint, the timeline offers limited opportunities for anyone to effectively hide a body, given the small apartment layout and the presence of nearby vacationers. If Madeleine had died during this window, it seems unlikely that it would have gone unnoticed for so long. However, there are aspects of the situation that suggest a potential cover-up could have occurred, such as the possibility that the body was concealed temporarily in a suitcase or even a refrigerator, as suggested by some theories. Moreover, the brief time frame of 90 minutes poses challenges from a psychological standpoint as well. People under intense stress and grief typically exhibit erratic behavior, which could be seen in how the McCanns responded to the situation. The decision to quickly declare that they had taken Madeleine without any immediate evidence of forced entry suggests that there may have been prior knowledge or an instinctive understanding of what had happened to her. Kate's statement in that moment, "They have taken her," indicates an immediate belief in abduction, which might be seen as an emotional response rooted in panic, or potentially a strategic declaration to cover up the true circumstances of her disappearance. The theory that the McCanns' statements and actions during the golden window were rehearsed has been suggested by critics. They argue that the swift adoption of the abduction narrative could have been part of a premeditated effort to mislead authorities and the public, although this remains purely speculative. The idea that both parents were acting in unison, knowing exactly what to say and do, might suggest a deeper involvement in Madeleine's disappearance than what was initially apparent. In terms of the physical evidence, the 90 minutes also raises questions. The apartment was not immediately searched after Madeleine was discovered missing, allowing crucial evidence to potentially be altered or removed. Some theories suggest that the body could have been temporarily hidden in a bag or other container during that time, only to be disposed of later. This would have been difficult to do without leaving traces behind, especially in a setting where forensic investigators were likely to be on high alert. The golden window of time continues to be one of the most contentious aspects of the Madeleine McCann case. While 90 minutes might seem like a short time to conceal or cover up a death, the emotional and psychological factors at play on that night complicate the issue further. Could the McCanns have covered up an accidental death during that brief period, or was Madeleine truly abducted, as they claimed? From a logical standpoint, the 90-minute window presents significant challenges for anyone attempting to hide a death or cover up a crime. Yet, the actions taken during this time along with the psychological pressure on the parents, leave room for doubt. What remains undeniable is that this golden window shaped the course of the investigation, the theories surrounding the case, and ultimately the public's perception of the McCanns' involvement. The mystery of what really happened in those 90 minutes may never be fully solved, but it will undoubtedly continue to fuel debates, theories, and questions for years to come. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann has been surrounded by controversy and speculation, particularly regarding the reactions of her parents, Jerry and Kate McCann, in the aftermath of the tragic event. As highly educated and experienced doctors, both Jerry and Kate had a deep understanding of the medical aspects of life, death, and trauma. This knowledge would have undoubtedly influenced their behavior and decisions during the chaotic hours that followed Madeleine's disappearance. However, their medical training also raised critical questions about how they might have responded to such an overwhelming crisis, especially in light of their expertise in dealing with death and its legal consequences. As doctors, both Jerry and Kate would have been well versed in the realities of death, decomposition, and forensic procedures. They would have understood that once a child's life has ended, resuscitation is typically not an option. As medical professionals, they knew that the body would begin to show signs of decomposition almost immediately, and that certain investigative procedures, such as an autopsy, could reveal evidence that might be damaging to them. The McCanns would have been acutely aware of how autopsies work. They are routine in death investigations and can often provide critical insights into the cause of death, including any signs of foul play or trauma. In this context, their knowledge of the forensic process could have had a significant psychological impact on them. They would have known that calling for an ambulance after discovering that their daughter was unconscious would likely have been futile, given that medical professionals are trained to assess the situation immediately and make judgments based on what they see. If they had come to the grim realization that Madeleine was dead, they would have recognized that any efforts to resuscitate her would be in vain. Unlike parents without medical training, who might have been driven by panic to dial emergency services in hopes of a miracle, the McCanns, equipped with a clear understanding of death's finality, might have felt an overwhelming sense of hopelessness and dread at the thought of facing the situation head-on. Medical professionals are also acutely aware of the consequences of a death investigation. An autopsy could potentially reveal more than just the cause of death. It could provide evidence that leads to criminal charges, loss of professional reputation, or even jail time. In the McCann's case, their understanding of the consequences of such an investigation would have made them aware of the devastating impact it could have on their careers, their family life, and their futures. In addition to the personal and professional toll of an investigation, there was also the looming possibility that the authorities would take their other children from them. As parents, the fear of losing their remaining children would have been a powerful motivator, one that could have clouded their judgment in the face of overwhelming grief and panic. The emotional paralysis that the McCanns may have experienced in the wake of Madeleine's disappearance is an important aspect of their response. As doctors, they were trained to maintain calm and composure in high-pressure situations. However, in the case of the sudden, tragic death of their child, they may have found themselves overwhelmed by a psychological phenomenon known as freezing, a response to extreme stress in which individuals feel paralyzed, unable to act or think rationally. This is part of the fight or flight response that humans experience in crisis situations. The McCanns, as experienced medical professionals, would have been familiar with this concept. Yet, when faced with the brutal reality of their child's death, they may have been rendered emotionally incapacitated. In the aftermath of such a traumatic event, grief and fear likely clouded their ability to make logical decisions. Rather than immediately seeking help or calling emergency services, they may have become fixated on managing the situation themselves. The idea of calling for help might have seemed impossible to them, as the consequences of involving authorities could have been disastrous. Their understanding of the ramifications of a death investigation, especially in a foreign country where they might not fully understand the legal system, would have made them fearful of the repercussions of calling for help too soon. The urge to preserve the body may have been one of their first reactions, a way to maintain control over the situation and avoid the inevitable signs of decomposition. From a medical perspective, both Jerry and Kate would have been familiar with the importance of preserving the body to avoid complications during an investigation. As doctors, they understood the critical role that the timing of discovery plays in forensic investigations. Bodies that are exposed to the elements or improperly stored can quickly deteriorate, making it more difficult for investigators to determine the cause of death or gather forensic evidence. The desire to preserve Madeleine's body, whether consciously or unconsciously, could have been driven by a combination of practical knowledge and emotional desperation. In the heat of the moment, it is possible that the McCanns, faced with the sudden and overwhelming loss of their daughter, acted on a biological instinct to protect the body. This instinct is deeply ingrained in many individuals during times of trauma. In this case, the need to preserve Madeleine's body might have been driven by the overwhelming fear that exposing it too soon would lead to complications in the investigation. It could also reflect an emotional desire to hold on to the last remnants of their daughter, to delay the finality of her death for as long as possible. The act of preserving the body might have been a desperate attempt to maintain control over an uncontrollable situation, particularly when they felt the walls closing in. However, the McCann's medical training also brought with it a certain level of awareness of the consequences of such actions. They would have known that hiding the body or attempting to conceal evidence would only complicate matters further. But, in their panic and shock, they may have failed to act rationally. The sense of powerlessness and fear in the face of such a horrific event could have led to actions that were less about logic and more about survival. An attempt to protect themselves, their family, and their reputations from the consequences of a tragic accident or a possible crime. In addition to their fear of legal consequences, the McCann's emotional state played a significant role in their reaction. The grief of losing a child is immeasurable, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness in that moment may have led them to make decisions that seemed out of character or inappropriate given their backgrounds. Doctors are trained to deal with death professionally, yet the emotional weight of losing their daughter may have caused them to act in ways that appeared cold or detached. This behavior, however, could be understood as a result of the psychological and emotional toll of the situation, an overwhelming fear of what would happen next, and an attempt to shield themselves from the full emotional impact of their loss. In conclusion, the McCann's professional background as doctors likely influenced their actions in the aftermath of Madeleine's disappearance in ways that were both rational and irrational. Their deep understanding of death and forensic procedures would have made them aware of the grim realities they faced, but it may also have contributed to their emotional paralysis and the desperate desire to preserve the body. These medical instincts, combined with their overwhelming fear of legal consequences and the potential loss of their remaining children, created a complex psychological dynamic that ultimately led to decisions and actions that would be scrutinized and criticized in the years that followed. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann has captivated the public and raised countless questions, particularly around the strange and suspicious circumstances that unfolded in the aftermath of that fateful night. Among the many aspects of the case that continue to fuel speculation and debate, one of the most intriguing and enigmatic elements is the mystery surrounding the three missing items: the fridge, Jerry's tennis bag, and Madeleine herself. These three objects, seemingly unrelated at first glance, are at the center of several theories regarding the concealment and transportation of Madeleine's body. In this analysis, we will delve into the potential significance of these missing items and explore the hypothesis that they were involved in an attempt to hide Madeleine's body. The first item that went missing was the fridge in the McCann apartment. According to reports, Jerry McCann himself removed the fridge from the apartment. The disappearance of this particular item raised immediate questions. Why would a fridge, a seemingly mundane household appliance, be removed from the apartment at such a crucial time? The fridge, typically used for storing perishable food, suddenly became a focal point of suspicion. From a forensic and logistical standpoint, the idea of using a fridge to store a body makes sense, especially in a scenario where the goal is to delay decomposition. As trained medical professionals, Jerry and Kate McCann would have understood the importance of keeping a body preserved for as long as possible in order to prevent decomposition and to avoid the unpleasant physical signs that occur after death. The fridge would have served as a means of preserving the body temporarily until they could figure out a more permanent solution, or until the immediate panic and chaos had subsided. The cold environment of the fridge would have slowed the natural process of decomposition, making it a practical option to hide the body for a period of time. This theory of using the fridge to preserve Madeleine's body is not only plausible from a practical standpoint, but also ties into the broader narrative of medical knowledge. Given the McCann's backgrounds as doctors, they would have been acutely aware of the stages of decomposition and the need to prevent the body from being discovered in a state that could potentially jeopardize any chance of a plausible cover-up. In this sense, the disappearance of the fridge becomes one of the most suspicious elements of the case. The second object that went missing was Jerry's tennis bag. This seemingly innocuous item has become a focal point of many theories regarding Madeleine's disappearance. The tennis bag, which Jerry was known to have taken with him to the tennis courts earlier in the evening, was reported to have disappeared after Madeleine went missing. The idea that a tennis bag, an item typically used to carry sports equipment, was involved in the disappearance raises several questions. Why would Jerry take his tennis bag with him, only for it to suddenly disappear? One hypothesis suggests that Madeleine's body was concealed in the tennis bag and transported out of the apartment in a manner that appeared normal. Tennis bags are relatively large and can easily conceal a small child's body, especially a child the size of Madeleine. By placing the body in the bag, Jerry could have discreetly moved it from the apartment without drawing attention. Given the context of the evening, it's plausible that the tennis bag was used as a vehicle to transport the body to a more secure location, where it could be hidden or disposed of later. This theory fits with the idea of acting quickly during a time of extreme emotional turmoil and the desperate need to hide evidence. Furthermore, the fact that Jerry carried the tennis bag out of the apartment after his game, while still wearing his tennis gear, provides further support for this theory. On the surface, this behavior might seem entirely normal, a man returning from his tennis game, carrying his bag, but in the context of the situation, it becomes highly suspicious. The tennis bag's disappearance could have been a calculated move, allowing Jerry to transport the body without raising any suspicions. The tennis bag was something that could easily pass as normal, a piece of equipment that Jerry was already known to carry around. However, the fact that it disappeared without explanation adds another layer of mystery to the case. The third and most tragic element in this equation is, of course, Madeleine McCann herself. Her sudden disappearance in the early hours of the evening left her parents and the entire world in shock. But the question remains, was she taken by an abductor, or did something else occur? The timeline surrounding Madeleine's disappearance has been heavily scrutinized, and the absence of clear evidence pointing to an abduction has led some to consider the possibility of an accident or unintentional harm. If Madeleine's death was accidental, such as a fall or an incident in which she was accidentally injured or killed, the McCanns, with their medical knowledge, would have been aware that the immediate aftermath would be critical. They would have known that time was of the essence in preventing decomposition, or the discovery of any evidence that could link them to the death. Madeleine's body would have needed to be hidden quickly, and both the fridge and the tennis bag may have been used to facilitate this. The urgency and panic surrounding the events could have prompted them to make decisions that seemed cold or detached, but were actually driven by a deep, instinctual desire to control the situation. The use of a tennis bag to conceal the body also ties into the broader narrative of protecting the body. If the McCanns had any inkling that the death might be ruled an accident, they would have known that hiding Madeleine's body temporarily could buy them time to come up with a more coherent explanation. Whether it was to avoid legal repercussions or to delay the inevitable consequences of a child's tragic death, the McCanns' actions could be seen as attempts to protect themselves and their family from the fallout. In many cases of child disappearance, investigators have found that perpetrators often have access to a hidden location, a property or secret space where the body can be concealed temporarily. The McCanns, being well-traveled professionals, may have had access to such a location. The idea of a vacant property or a familiar empty house is a concept familiar to travelers, especially those who visit places like Praia da Luz, which is frequented by British expatriates and tourists. It is possible that, during the initial chaos of Madeleine's disappearance, the McCanns turned to such a place of refuge, one that could be used to hide Madeleine's body, until they had time to decide what to do next. This hidden location theory aligns with the concept of familiar houses being offered to trusted friends or family members during vacation stays. A previous offer of an empty property nearby could have provided the McCanns with an alternative place to hide the body, particularly if they feared the imminent arrival of law enforcement or the investigation that would soon follow. The idea of moving the body to a safe, familiar location where they could control the situation more easily would have been a logical step to take, given their sense of urgency and desire to manage the fallout. The three missing items, the fridge, the tennis bag, and Madeleine herself, are inextricably linked in the timeline surrounding Madeleine McCann's disappearance. These objects, when examined together, paint a picture of a calculated response to a tragic accident or possibly a premeditated cover-up. Whether Madeleine's death was truly accidental or whether it was a more deliberate act, the actions taken by the McCanns, particularly the use of the fridge and tennis bag, offer potential insight into how they might have reacted in a moment of extreme panic. The use of familiar locations and ordinary objects, such as the tennis bag and fridge, helped the McCanns conceal what had occurred, at least for a brief period. But whether these actions were driven by instinct, fear, or something more sinister remains a mystery. What remains clear is that the disappearance of Madeleine McCann is a case full of unanswered questions, and the role these missing items played in the aftermath of her disappearance continues to be a critical piece of the puzzle. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann has generated various theories, some more plausible than others, but none more extreme than the two discussed here. These theories, accidental death and panic disposal, and child molestation and human trafficking, reflect the deep divide in public opinion about what might have really happened that night in Praia da Luz. Both theories, though, are based on very different interpretations of the evidence and the circumstances surrounding Madeleine's disappearance. Here, we will examine these theories in detail, exploring the facts that support them, as well as the elements that make them hard to believe. The first extreme theory suggests that Madeleine's death was an accidental tragedy, followed by a panic-driven cover-up. According to this theory, Madeleine climbed onto the couch to look out the window, lost her balance, and fell behind it, where she became stuck and suffocated. This scenario points to a sudden, unintentional death that left the McCanns in a state of extreme panic. As doctors, they would have known that any attempt to resuscitate her would likely have been futile, and they might have acted quickly to conceal the accident, driven by fear of legal consequences, public judgment, and the emotional toll of losing their child. One piece of evidence supporting this theory is the testimony of neighbors who reported hearing a child crying late in the evening, possibly Madeleine. This could suggest she was trapped and crying out for help before suffocating. However, there is no definitive proof that it was Madeleine, or that the crying occurred at the time of her death. The disappearance of the fridge and tennis bag also fits into this theory. The fridge could have been used to temporarily preserve her body, preventing decomposition, while the tennis bag, seen with Jerry McCann, might have been used to conceal and transport her body discreetly. These items suggest the McCanns were trying to control the situation, buying time to process the tragedy. However, this theory faces challenges. The McCanns' delayed response in contacting authorities raises suspicions, as it could be seen as an attempt to hide the death before involving the police. Additionally, their immediate assumption of abduction, without evidence, casts doubt on the timeline. This rushed conclusion complicates the idea that the McCanns' actions were driven by panic over an accidental death. In contrast, the second extreme theory proposes something far darker: child molestation and human trafficking. This theory suggests that the McCanns, or at least one of them, were complicit in allowing Madeleine to be abused by a child molester in exchange for money, and that Madeleine's disappearance was the result of a pre-arranged, covert plan. The central argument here is that the McCanns deliberately drugged their children, a practice that was, in theory, meant to ensure that the children would remain asleep while they were subjected to abuse. One of the most telling pieces of evidence often cited in support of this theory is the statement made by Kate McCann when she declared, "They've taken her." This declaration, made moments after she discovered Madeleine was missing, is seen as a potential clue indicating that Kate knew exactly who they were, the perpetrators of the abuse. Rather than immediately assuming that Madeleine had simply wandered off or been abducted by a stranger, Kate's specific words suggest a pre-existing knowledge of who might have been involved. Some theorists believe that the they Kate referred to was part of a pre-arranged plan involving child molesters, possibly even a network of human traffickers. Another piece of evidence frequently cited by proponents of this theory is the McCanns' possession of books about child trafficking. These books were found in their apartment and raised questions about why a family on vacation would be carrying such material. It is also suggested that the McCanns knew more about trafficking and abuse than they publicly admitted. The presence of such books could indicate that they were aware of the risks of child exploitation, and perhaps they had made some arrangements in the past that might explain why Madeleine was in danger in the first place. In addition to the books, it is alleged that the McCanns used sleeping pills or sedatives on their children to keep them unconscious during the alleged abuse. The theory proposes that drugging the children was seen as a way to prevent them from waking up and witnessing anything that might have occurred. This would explain the absence of any screams or sounds of distress during Madeleine's disappearance. If she was drugged and unconscious at the time of her abduction, she would not have been able to cry out for help, and the perpetrators could have easily taken her without anyone hearing. However, there are several issues with this theory that make it hard to believe. One of the major inconsistencies is the blood found in the rental car and the blood stains on the walls of the apartment. If the McCanns had been involved in an organized plan to sell or exploit their child, why would there be signs of violence in the apartment or the rental car? If Madeleine was drugged, she would not have been in a state of distress, and there should have been no reason for blood to be present. Additionally, the theory suggests a motive for the abuse, yet the McCanns were financially well off and had no known need for money through such illegal means. The lack of a clear, credible motive for why the McCanns would willingly subject their child to abuse makes this theory particularly hard to accept. Moreover, the idea of the McCanns willingly engaging in such activities contradicts their public image as devoted parents. The theory that the McCanns were involved in trafficking their child seems almost too extreme to be plausible, particularly when considering their professional backgrounds and the support they had from friends and family. In most child trafficking cases, there is a clear financial motive, but there is no evidence to suggest that the McCanns were financially struggling or involved in any criminal activity. Finally, the moving of the sofa, the blood stains, and other pieces of forensic evidence that pointed to possible violence cast further doubt on the theory. If the McCanns were involved in an elaborate scheme to stage an abduction, why would they risk leaving traces of blood and evidence behind? Why not ensure that the apartment was cleaned up properly, especially if they knew they would soon be under investigation? The two extreme theories, accidental death and panic disposal, and child molestation and human trafficking, represent drastically different interpretations of the evidence surrounding Madeleine McCann's disappearance. While the first theory presents a tragic, but not improbable, scenario of a cover-up in the face of an accidental death, the second theory ventures into the realm of deep conspiracy, suggesting premeditated child exploitation. Both theories are fueled by some plausible details, but they each face significant hurdles. The presence of forensic evidence, inconsistencies in the timeline, and the lack of clear motives all complicate these theories. Ultimately, the mystery of Madeleine's disappearance remains unsolved, and while these extreme theories offer different perspectives, neither provides a definitive answer to what truly happened on that fateful night in Praia da Luz. The interviews conducted with Jerry and Kate McCann in the aftermath of Madeleine's disappearance have been a subject of intense scrutiny, particularly regarding their behavior and the inconsistencies in their responses. These interviews, captured on video, have fueled widespread speculation and have become critical pieces of evidence in the public's perception of the McCanns' involvement, or lack thereof, in the case. Two main issues have stood out in the interviews: Jerry's perceived duping delight, and the differences in the way he and Kate answered questions. Additionally, the theory that one parent may have been guilty while the other was innocent raises intriguing psychological questions, particularly within the context of partnership crimes. One of the most notable elements of the interviews is Jerry McCann's suspected duping delight, a psychological term used to describe a facial expression or behavior that suggests a person is secretly pleased or amused by the deception they are trying to hide. This behavior has been identified in several moments during Jerry's interviews, where, in response to certain questions, he exhibits signs of subtle amusement. His smile or smirk, particularly when discussing matters he should have been emotionally distraught over, raised suspicions that he might not have been as grief-stricken as one would expect from a parent whose child had gone missing. Observers pointed out that Jerry's reaction to certain questions about his daughter's abduction seemed inappropriate or out of place. For example, when asked about whether he had seen anything suspicious prior to Madeleine's disappearance, Jerry's response was delayed and somewhat evasive. He smiled awkwardly before answering, and even appeared to struggle for words, a behavior that many found troubling. His body language, including smiling, laughing, and looking somewhat amused, was not in line with the expected emotional reaction to the tragic loss of his daughter. This behavior raised alarms among critics, who interpreted it as indicative of a possible guilty conscience, or, more disturbingly, an indication that Jerry might be enjoying the deception, a hallmark of duping delight. This concept of duping delight is not universally accepted, and some have argued that these reactions could be simply nervous behaviors in a highly stressful situation. After all, speaking publicly about a missing child is an incredibly difficult and emotionally overwhelming task. However, when coupled with his more delayed responses and attempts to deflect uncomfortable questions, Jerry's behavior becomes suspect to those looking for signs of guilt or involvement in his daughter's disappearance. Another point of concern for interviewers and viewers alike is Jerry's tendency to give long-winded, convoluted responses to relatively simple questions. His answers often lack directness and clarity, For example, when asked about the events surrounding the night Madeleine disappeared, Jerry's responses often seemed to lack focus and simplicity, leading some to believe that he was attempting to avoid revealing crucial details. His long-winded nature in interviews is particularly stark when contrasted with Kate's more succinct, direct answers. Kate, in most cases, gave shorter, more straightforward responses, which some viewers interpreted as a sign of genuine emotion and grief. Meanwhile, Jerry's more calculated responses raised suspicions about his sincerity. In these moments, he appeared to be constructing his answers carefully, possibly to control the narrative or avoid giving away potentially incriminating information. This level of detail and evasion is often seen in individuals who are attempting to cover up something they know. When people lie, they sometimes offer excessive detail to make their story appear more credible. And this is often seen as a defense mechanism in case of suspicion. Jerry's over-elaboration and tendency to speak in circles was seen as a sign of inconsistency in his account of the night in question, which is something a liar might do to fill in gaps or deflect scrutiny. A critical comparison can be made between the way Kate and Jerry McCann responded to questions during their interviews. While both parents were visibly distraught and emotionally overwhelmed, their emotional responses and speaking styles were notably different. Kate's responses were generally quick, clear, and direct, while Jerry's were often more measured, slow, and sometimes awkward. This contrast in their communication styles has led to a great deal of psychological analysis. Kate McCann's quick and precise answers have been interpreted by some as a reflection of a mother's instinctive and natural reaction to the situation, speaking from a place of emotional pain and urgency. In contrast, Jerry's slower and more deliberate responses raised questions. Psychologists have suggested that this difference could point to a difference in coping mechanisms. Some have speculated that Jerry's long pauses and awkwardness were signs of guilt or distress, while Kate's quick responses were seen as signs of genuine grief. In the context of partnership crimes, where one partner might be guilty and the other might be innocent, this difference in behavior could be indicative of the psychological dynamics at play. If one parent was involved in Madeleine's disappearance, their behavior would naturally be more calculating and detached, as seen with Jerry's more cautious, drawn-out responses. Meanwhile, the other parent, assuming they were unaware or not involved, might have been emotionally distressed and more forthcoming with their answers, much like Kate. One of the more intriguing psychological theories surrounding the McCanns is the idea that one parent might have been guilty while the other was innocent. This theory suggests that if only one parent were involved in the crime, whether through direct participation in Madeleine's death or in covering up the accident, the other parent may have remained unaware of the full extent of the situation. In this case, one parent might be experiencing genuine grief and shock, while the other could be grappling with guilt and the emotional burden of a cover-up. Jerry's behavior in interviews, his measured, defensive tone, his long-winded answers, and the possibility of duping delight could suggest that he was more involved in some capacity, perhaps in an accidental death or a staged cover-up. On the other hand, Kate's emotional responses and directness could imply that she was either unaware of the true events or that her grief was genuine and undiluted by guilt. In the realm of partnership crimes, there is often a dynamic where one partner takes the lead in committing the act, and the other partner becomes a secondary participant, or a passive accomplice, either through ignorance or fear. The emotional and behavioral differences between Kate and Jerry may support this theory. If Kate was genuinely unaware of what had happened to Madeleine, her reactions to the interview questions would naturally be more emotional and instinctive. Meanwhile, Jerry's cautiousness and seeming discomfort in the interviews could indicate that he had a more complex relationship with the situation, possibly because of his involvement in the events leading up to Madeleine's disappearance. The analysis of the McCann's interviews reveals a complex interplay of behavior, communication, and psychology. Jerry McCann's perceived duping delight, his long-winded and evasive answers, and the differences in how he and Kate responded to questions have all contributed to the public's suspicions regarding their involvement in Madeleine's disappearance. The theory that one parent could be guilty while the other is innocent further complicates the psychological dynamics, particularly in cases of partnership crimes, where one partner may hide the truth from the other. While no definitive conclusions can be drawn from the interviews alone, the behaviors displayed by both Jerry and Kate McCann continue to be a central aspect of the case, fueling ongoing debate and speculation. The latest developments in the investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine McCann have brought a new prime suspect into the spotlight: Christian Bruckner, a convicted sex offender and serial rapist who is currently serving time in Germany for unrelated crimes. Bruckner, whose name has been repeatedly linked to the case in recent years, has become the focus of renewed interest following fresh revelations in the Spanish press. Authorities have been investigating his potential involvement in Madeleine's disappearance, and the urgency of the investigation has increased as Bruckner is set to be released from prison in the near future. Christian Bruckner's criminal history is deeply troubling. He has been convicted of several sexual offenses, including the rape of young girls, and is known to have committed numerous heinous acts during his time living in the Algarve region of Portugal, not far from where Madeleine was last seen. His time in Portugal has led investigators to believe that he may have been operating in the area around the time of Madeleine's disappearance in 2007. In fact, new evidence has suggested that Bruckner might have been in the vicinity on the night Madeleine went missing. Satellite images from 2007, showing areas where Bruckner was known to have frequented, have added weight to these suspicions. These images, showing a dilapidated house and a nearby mobile phone tower, indicate that Bruckner may have been near the McCann family's holiday apartment in Praia da Luz during that time, lending credence to theories that he could have been involved in the crime. One of the most significant aspects of the renewed investigation is the urgency with which authorities are moving to gather evidence before Bruckner's release. Bruckner is scheduled to serve the remaining portion of his sentence, and, given the amount of time that has passed since Madeleine's disappearance, authorities are racing against the clock to investigate any potential link between him and the case before he is free to return to society. Spanish authorities, in particular, have been working diligently with international agencies to piece together the evidence, with a focus on Bruckner's known movements and connections in the Algarve during the critical time of Madeleine's disappearance. Despite the increasing focus on Bruckner, many questions remain about the role of the McCanns in the case. If Bruckner is indeed involved in Madeleine's abduction or death, one might ask, why did the McCanns behave in such unusual ways after Madeleine's disappearance? Over the years, several aspects of the McCanns' behavior have raised suspicions. Their initial response to the disappearance, including the delayed call to the authorities and the immediate assumption that Madeleine had been abducted, has been viewed by some as inconsistent with what one might expect from parents in such a tragic situation. The McCanns' decision to maintain a public stance that they were not involved in any wrongdoing, despite the increasingly complex nature of the investigation, has led to speculation about their potential knowledge or involvement in the events that led to Madeleine's disappearance. If Bruckner were to be conclusively linked to the case, the question of why the McCanns acted in such an unusual manner would still linger. Could their behavior be explained by fear of legal consequences, or were they simply acting out of shock and grief? One theory suggests that their response could be linked to a need to maintain control over the narrative of the case. The quick declaration of abduction, which was made without solid evidence, might have been an attempt to prevent any suspicion from falling on them, or perhaps to push the investigation in a particular direction, one that was less likely to lead to them being implicated. Another factor that could explain the McCanns' behavior is the psychological toll of the situation. Losing a child is an unimaginable tragedy, and the McCann's actions might have been shaped by a profound sense of panic, fear, and the inability to process their grief in a typical manner. The stress of being thrust into the public eye, the media scrutiny, and the overwhelming uncertainty about what happened to Madeleine might have caused them to react in ways that seem out of place. Their behavior, when viewed under the lens of trauma and the stress of a missing child investigation, could be interpreted as a natural, albeit flawed, coping mechanism. Ultimately, the renewed focus on Christian Brueckner as the prime suspect has brought fresh attention to the Madeleine McCann case. His criminal history, coupled with the new evidence suggesting he may have been in the area around the time of the disappearance, has sparked hope that justice may one day be served. However, as investigators continue to dig into Brueckner's possible involvement, the McCanns remain at the center of the public's attention. Whether their actions were motivated by guilt, fear, or shock remains an open question, but it is clear that their behavior has continued to fuel debates and theories regarding their role in the case. As the investigation unfolds, only time will tell if Brueckner's connection to Madeleine's disappearance can be definitively proven, and whether the McCanns' actions will finally be understood in light of the truth. The case of Madeleine McCann's disappearance has not only captivated the world, but has also led to a profound division in public opinion about the McCanns' involvement. Some people firmly believe that Jerry and Kate McCann are innocent, while others are convinced of their guilt. The psychology behind these opposing views is complex and reflects broader societal themes, such as perceptions of parental responsibility, the role of wealth and social status, and how we process grief and trauma. This divide in public opinion is also influenced by people's personal experiences with parenting, as well as their ability to relate to the McCanns' situation. One of the main reasons that some people believe the McCanns are innocent is their perception of the couple as the ideal parents: educated, professional, and devoted to their children. Both Jerry and Kate McCann were highly respected professionals. Jerry, a consultant cardiologist, and Kate, a general practitioner, had established careers that provided them with a stable and affluent lifestyle. Their social status and wealth painted them as successful and responsible individuals, people who appeared to have everything under control. This public image of the McCanns as a model family reinforced the idea that they could not have been involved in any wrongdoing, especially something as heinous as the disappearance of their own child. The McCanns' financial stability and social position also played a significant role in how some people viewed their innocence. The couple's background in the medical field led some to believe that they were too professional and morally upstanding to be involved in any criminal activity. Their intelligence and wealth made them appear beyond reproach. In many cases, society tends to trust those who hold prestigious careers, assuming that their positions of authority come with a certain level of integrity. This bias toward trusting the perfect family dynamic, where the parents are educated, successful, and seemingly perfect, played a large role in the public's initial sympathy for the McCanns and their denial of involvement in the case. Moreover, their behavior during the investigation was often interpreted as a sign of genuine grief and panic. The McCanns' public plea for help and their constant media appearances to raise awareness of Madeleine's disappearance could have reinforced their innocence in the eyes of many. People saw their desperation and emotional distress as evidence of parents who were simply trying to find their missing child, not individuals hiding something sinister. For some, the McCanns' emotional expressions seemed authentic, adding weight to the belief that they were genuinely innocent victims of a tragedy. On the other side of the spectrum, many people are convinced that the McCanns were involved in some way in Madeleine's disappearance, citing suspicious behavior and parental neglect as the key reasons for their belief. Their actions in the aftermath of Madeleine's disappearance raised red flags for many observers. For instance, the decision to leave 3 young children alone in an apartment while they dined at a nearby restaurant, was seen as highly irresponsible and negligent. Critics argued that such behavior was not just careless but potentially criminal, given the risks involved in leaving small children unsupervised in an unfamiliar environment. The lack of immediate action by the McCanns, particularly the delay in contacting authorities after realizing Madeleine was missing, also contributed to suspicions about their involvement. Some perceived their quick assumption of abduction as an attempt to deflect suspicion from themselves. Instead of treating the situation with caution or exploring other possibilities, the McCanns were quick to adopt a narrative of abduction, which many felt was an attempt to control the investigation and steer it away from more uncomfortable possibilities, such as an accidental death or neglect. Additionally, Jerry McCann's behavior during interviews added to the belief in his guilt. Critics pointed out that he seemed to display a type of duping delight in some of his responses. This term refers to the unconscious enjoyment or smugness that a person might display while deceiving others. Observers noticed moments during Jerry's interviews when he appeared to smile or display inappropriate facial expressions for the gravity of the situation. This behavior, combined with his long-winded, evasive answers, led some to suspect that he was hiding something. While some believed this could simply be nerves or the strain of being in the public eye, others viewed it as a sign of guilt. The suspicion of guilt was further compounded by the lack of clarity around the timeline of events and the discrepancy in the McCanns' version of the night's events. The fact that Madeleine was left alone for a significant period raised doubts about their ability to protect their children. Parents are typically expected to provide constant supervision for young children, and the idea of leaving them alone in an unfamiliar apartment with an unlocked door struck many as careless and out of character for responsible parents. Another critical factor influencing public opinion about the McCanns is the personal experience of those who are judging them. For many parents, particularly those who have young children themselves, the idea of leaving their child unsupervised, even for a short time, is unimaginable. The basic instinct to protect their children runs so deeply in many parents that the idea of neglecting that duty seems unfathomable. The notion of leaving children alone in a foreign country without professional childcare or supervision, especially in a rented apartment, is almost impossible for some to grasp. Parents often look at the McCanns' decision and feel an immediate emotional rejection. How could they do this? How could they take such a risk with their child's safety? This strong emotional reaction is often tied to the idea that a parent's duty is to protect their child at all costs, and the McCanns' behavior, particularly in leaving their children alone, seems to violate that instinct. The emotional outrage over their decision to leave the children alone was particularly pronounced among parents who could not fathom how any responsible mother or father would behave in such a way. These individuals tend to believe that if the McCanns were capable of such negligence, it's possible that they could have been involved in other actions that led to Madeleine's death or disappearance. Some parents, in particular, cannot fathom the idea of hiding the death of their child, even if it were accidental. They find it unimaginable that any parent, especially one who is a professional and presumably morally upright, would engage in such a cover-up. The idea that the McCanns might have hidden Madeleine's body or concealed the truth seems so foreign to these parents that they are more likely to believe in a scenario of abduction rather than a cover-up of an accidental death. These individuals often express their disbelief on social media, in interviews, and in forums dedicated to the case. The case of the McCanns reveals the deep complexities of human psychology and public opinion. Some people are inclined to believe in the McCanns' innocence, largely because of their public image as the ideal family, with education, wealth, and social status. Others, however, cannot overlook the perceived signs of negligence and inconsistency in their behavior, which raises suspicions about their involvement in Madeleine's disappearance. The clash between these two opposing viewpoints stems from personal experiences with parenting and an inability to understand the actions taken by the McCanns. As parents, it is easy to imagine ourselves in the McCanns' shoes and to feel sympathy for their loss. But it is also natural to react with suspicion when the actions of those involved do not align with our own understanding of responsible parenting. The McCanns case continues to spark strong emotional responses because it challenges deeply held beliefs about parenting, responsibility, and the lengths to which a person might go to protect themselves or their family from the consequences of an accident or crime. The gap between these perspectives, the belief in their innocence versus the suspicion of their guilt, remains one of the most poignant and enduring elements of the Madeleine McCann case. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann has left the world with a series of unanswered questions that continue to fuel debate and speculation. One of the first and most critical questions that remains unresolved is, who exactly were they? When Kate McCann cried out, "They've taken her," was she referring to an abductor, or could there be a deeper, more complex explanation? The use of the word, "they," implies knowledge of those involved, yet no clear evidence has emerged to identify who they could be, leaving the true nature of Madeleine's disappearance shrouded in mystery. Another key question is whether the disappearance was truly an accident or a premeditated plot. Was it simply an unfortunate tragedy where Madeleine met an untimely death, or was there a more sinister conspiracy at play? Some theories suggest that it was a tragic accident, one that led to panic and poor decisions by the McCanns in the aftermath. Others, however, point to the possibility of an elaborate cover-up or planned event, questioning whether Madeleine's disappearance was part of a more sinister plan. Additionally, there remains the question of whether anyone other than the McCanns was involved in Madeleine's disappearance. The case has seen various theories over the years, some suggesting that the McCanns might have been involved in some way, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Was there someone else at the scene that night? Or was the McCann family the only one connected to the events leading up to Madeleine's disappearance? Could there have been a third party with knowledge of what happened? Or was it only the McCanns who were involved in some way? As the years pass, these questions remain largely unanswered, and the mystery of what happened to Madeleine McCann continues to haunt both the McCann family and the public. Was this a tragic accident, a chilling conspiracy, or something even more sinister? Perhaps we'll never truly know. The truth behind Madeleine's disappearance may be buried forever, leaving behind a series of unanswered questions that will continue to provoke debate for years to come.